folks, welcome to the channel. We're taking a look though today, and I'm so curious. I love learning. I'm a philosopher by nature. Joe Rogan is too, and Brian Keating and he are sitting down talking about how Isaac Newton was insane. I think that's the word Brian Keating used. And I read this a year or two ago, Brian Keating's book, Losing the Nobel Prize, and it was a great read. I mean, there was just a lot of information about how the Nobel Society works and how they choose their people and the different names of awards and how he got funded and, you know, just about cosmic background radiation, the age of the microwave radiation and B-mode polarity and how space dust confuses. It was really good stuff. I did not know that Isaac Newton was nuts. I mean, generally speaking, when you're at that level of intellect and a forerunner in what you do, you're going to be minimally, or in the least case, idiosyncratic, likely somewhere on the spectrum, because everybody would like to place on some spectrum nowadays, and otherwise might be extremely eccentric. All right, let's find out what Brian Keating's got to say with Joe here.
Newton had the impostor syndrome. He said, "You're kidding me, Newton." He was like, because Newton was kind of a prick. Newton had a huge ego. He was not kind to his friends. He tortured people as the master of the mint, or he had them tortured.
Tortured people?
Yeah, he was
physically tortured people.
He was responsible. He was like he was responsible for the equivalent of the IRS in England. So people would cheat. They would scrape down pennies.
That's right. Yeah. I've read this.
He was the master of the mint, it was called.
Yeah, that's right.
He was also
about this.
Alchemist. He was an amazing guy, but he was kind of a prick.
And he had imposter syndrome as well.
So he had imposter syndrome. Now, who could he have imposter syndrome about? You might wonder. And if you read his writings, do you know what Isaac Newton, the creator of calculus, the first person to understand universal gravitation, discovered the laws of optics, do you know what his biggest accomplishment, according to him, was?
What?
He died a virgin.
Yeah, that was a weird one, right? Yeah, yes, I was going to bring that up. He was celibate.
You know why?
Why?
Because there's only one way that he could emulate his hero, the person before whom he felt the imposter syndrome. And who was that? That was Jesus Christ.
Oh, boy.
So he wanted to be Christ-like. He wanted to emulate Christ. And the only way he could do it, he couldn't like fast, or I don't know, he couldn't walk on water. He couldn't turn water into wine. He couldn't turn loaves into fishes or whatever Jesus also did. But he could die celibate. And that's who he had imposter syndrome.
Are you sure he just was like an excuse for he didn't like sex?
I don't know.
I mean, it sounds nutty. Because like, how do you figure that out when you're like 14, 15 years old?
Yeah.
You know, you're young and full of hormones, and you've made this decision to be like Jesus?
Yeah.
He sounds insane.
He definitely was. He was not like Galileo. You would want to hang out with Galileo. If you met Galileo,
I probably want to hang out with him too.
Yeah, no.
For a little bit. Just to see what it's like.
So when you win the Nobel Prize, you go there, and what is the commandment about idol worship? It's that you shall make no gilded, golden, graven, like engraved images. So who is that? Do you know who that is?
Albert Nobel?
Yeah, it's Alfred Nobel. That's right.
Alfred.
And you know, he invented dynamite, and he also died. He died never having been married. I don't know if he was celibate or
Holla.
So he was never married. But he established this prize. When you win it, you literally, the king of Sweden comes up to you, and you must bow down to him. And he puts the gilded graven image on your head. So for all the trappings and all the 90% of National Academy members who do not actively profess a belief in God, this can become at some level a religion. And it's a kosher one. It's okay to worship this, right?
Well, the unattainable that's maybe...
Well, and I'll give an aside too. I had suggested to some friends some decades ago, especially one very close friend of mine, Roseanne. She and I had been involved in a fundamentalist Christian group, very Bible-based. The Bible's the Word of God, that kind of thing. We've since seen otherwise. But I had suggested some time back that I had seen that it seemed like just the writing down of these documents became a form of worship in its own right. Because people were more wedded to the pages here than they were to their own spiritual life. And I just said, it just seems weird that people just seem to be defending so deeply these documents that, I mean, they have forgeries in them, which we know, and they came translated through different languages. But I said, it strikes me that maybe the very thing in these pages speaking against graven images I mean, how do these pages get released, like the Gutenberg Bible and such? They were graven. They were the typing, the printing press, and all this stuff as it rolled them out. And I just said, here we have a stationary group of ideas. They're intransigent. You know, when you believe it's the word of God, go through all time, and God doesn't change. Therefore, these words don't change because he had them written. That, to me, that was sort of a turning point. There were a number of turning points where now I'm agnostic, but that the Bible itself appears to be an object of worship more in many ways. And I saw this in fundamentalist groups, more than people worshiped God or Jesus or whoever you want to worship in your particular religion. And it seemed kind of wrong to be worshiping words on a page more than you do the person you say who created life and wrote these words. So there was just like a logical and even moral inconsistency there.
Perhaps attainable to a very select few is always the thing that people are chasing after, especially like high achievers.
That's right.
But many that I know that get there do have imposter syndrome, including MMA world champions. Like some of them, they get there like, this isn't real. This can't be real. I can't be the man.
Because they've set this up their whole
Yes.
life. And also, look, you can get to the promised land, but you can't stay in it. How many baseball teams have won the World Series year after year forever? I mean, even the Yankees haven't done that. Even your Bo Sox haven't done that, right?
They're not mine.
Okay, fine. But for me, as a young kid, this is what I aspired. And actually, as an adult, I wanted to win this basically at all costs. This became but it was acceptable because people told me, like if you discover these waves of gravity manifest in the cosmic background radiation that I study, you're guaranteed to win the Nobel Prize. And it became an obsession to me, as well as being scientifically interesting to be a part of. There are very few projects that are
But there's nothing wrong with having those kinds of goals. And he knows that. It's just sort of your expectations that when you get there, it's going to be all of this. Talk with people who have made it to this level, whether you're Billy Joel in music or anybody, and it's like, yeah, it's not what we think. We still have to be human and we're still going to die. And that is the great equalizer among all of us, that we have this noodling around there in the back of our mind and foreground sometimes is our own mortality. That says, all right, there's still a lot more to accomplish here on life, and even that won't satisfy the idea that I'm going to die one day.
Eligible to win a Nobel Prize, let alone that I can win it. But for me, it was kind of an added dimension that came with it. And that was, like the normal kid might have it with sports and their dad, or maybe the other way around. When you're a dad, you might treat your kids like that, like, oh, you think you could take me on or whatever. And so for that was the main source of driving impetus for my personal quest to get this particular idol in my life.
That's wild. Are you aware of Ronald Mallett? Do you know who he is?
No.
He is, I believe he's out of the University of Connecticut. He studies time travel, and he became obsessed with time travel after his father died when he was a young boy, because he felt like if he worked hard enough, he could develop a time machine and go back and save his father.
No,
it's wild. It's literally a Spider-Man origin story.
Exactly.
Until
this
you
guy
do
has
it,
been
then it's not
dedicating his
crazy.
life to finding a working model of a time machine. And I think
everything is crazy until you do it. That's the whole thing. That's the and for every one person that accomplishes what seemed to be crazy or unattainable at the time, like traveling to Mars. Now Elon and Bezos, and I don't know if Branson wants to get there or not, but these folks who want to get there seemed crazy. And then they do it, and then it becomes de rigueur. It just becomes normal. It's part of everyday life. It was crazy at one time, but for every person who accomplishes that, there are probably 100 or 1,000 people whose idea seems crazy and didn't materialize. But that's where these entrepreneurial endeavors, where, I mean, even the arts are entrepreneurial. It's anytime you write a song, there was nothing on the page, the lyrics weren't there, the music wasn't there. There's an infinite number of combinations in which the instrumentation and the instruments can be put together and assembled. The length, the tempo. Should we bring in a triangle on this one or cowbell? How are the drums going to work with the bass and then the lyrics over the top of it? And do we bring in a backing vocal? I mean, there is an infinite number of combinations that you can do to put together a song. It's entrepreneurial. There's nothing there. we're so used to music now that, of course, it doesn't seem entrepreneurial, but it is. Every single song, every bit of artwork is entrepreneurial. But for every song that becomes a hit and tickles all of our ears, or most of our ears, you've got 10,000 that get written that are amazing songs that just never made it. So the idea of going after something that seemed crazy, like a time machine, they may figure out at some point, wormhole. It starts with crazy ideas. They seem crazy because they don't exist yet. They haven't manifested. But once they do, you're like, whoa.
Was it Kurt Gödel? Like, how do you say his name?
Gödel, yeah.
Gödel.
Mm-hmm.
It's that weird umlaut.
Umlaut. Yeah.
How do you say it?
Gödel.
Gödel.
Yeah.
It's like people that say Van Gogh, and then no, it's really Van Gogh. I'm like, excuse you.
But he developed a working model, but it just required something like the size of the solar system.
No, you're right. I don't know how you know that. But yeah, he had a rotating cosmos where you could have what are called world lines. You could have just like you could walk around the surface of the Earth, and if you go in the same direction, eventually you'll come back to where you started. Mm-hmm. If the universe was somehow rotating in the way that he envisioned it, you could have it end up on a time start where you began from the beginning. Yeah, see that traveler's life like time like curve.
Wild.
Gödel's interesting because he and Einstein were buddies back at the Institute for Advanced Study, like Oppenheimer. I don't know if you saw Oppenheimer, but
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, you should see it.
I don't go to the movies. I do go to the movies. I saw Barbie.
Yeah, did it? Your girls tried you there?
I mean, everything's a goddamn culture war.
I know. That's what I love about astronomy. No one ever freaking wakes up and says, see that comet over there? That's a Republican. There's a Democrat astronaut. No, screw that.
It makes you're studying things that are so immense and so spectacular that it makes all this stuff seem like nonsense. This stuff that people fill their days up with complaining about.
Yep.
A Barbie movie. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I don't know about the Barbie movie. I didn't see it. I don't know if that was PC stuff. I can't imagine it wouldn't have been PC because everything nowadays seems to be PC. The notion, I mean, obviously I love the way these conversations sort of meander and go into different places on Rogan's podcast because Rogan is good. He's just good. He's good at what he does. And for a guy who's taken as many punches to the head and body and doled them out and stuff in his MMA career, people who know him in that capacity might not be able to embrace him as an intellect, but he does have a very curious mind. He's able to grasp a lot of information. And it's sometimes when you see like a football player, maybe he was like an offensive lineman, and they always score the highest on the Wonderlic tests too. But you'll hear him speak. He's like 325, 6'7", and extraordinarily articulate. And there's like a cognitive dissonance there that we can experience where you're like, you're not supposed to be that smart. You're an offensive lineman bashing people on the inside there. You're trying to keep the D lineman out from blindsiding or just getting to your quarterback or running back. And sort of in our minds, we build up these categories we do of people and set our expectations accordingly. And then somebody comes through and blasts through that expectation and they're phenomenally bright. And you're hearing this interview on the Michael Kay show or wherever, and you're like, God, that dude is really bright. He's not just a football player. And in this case with Rogan, I mean, I love the interviews he gives, and people clearly like being on his show, not merely because he's got so many followers, but he's got so many followers because he gives insightful interviews, gives people the room to breathe and talk, and it's not scripted. And my show's not scripted either. I don't know if eventually, my comments are not prepared because I like to think on the fly. And Rogan has these folks on there. Brian Keating, I think, would be a pretty cool dude to hang out with. He seems to be well-versed in a lot of ideas, just has this curious mind, is based on the book that I read too. Not merely is he very, very bright, but well-rounded and very curious learner. And I love the way they ended it with like the stars, the skies, and all. There's nothing PC about it. There's nothing to fight over. I mean, people can fight over different things, and they will, and have their opinions. And one thing I've noted along life's path, and probably for the last 2 decades, I realized, and it made conversation with people much easier for me, was when I realized that even when I'm right, my opinions have no great significance. So I became much less argumentative at that time, and conversations a lot more fun with people. And Rogan seems to embrace that. And Brian Keating seemed to embrace it. So that was fun more than just talking about Einstein and Gödel and other things. But the fact that Newton, I didn't know this about Newton, that what did he say? Not the keeper of the mint, but basically the equivalent of a tax collector. And they were douchebags back in the day, and they still can be now, but at least in the US it's a little bit more regulated and they work with you better. But I didn't know that Newton's idol, if you will, they referred to it as impostor syndrome, was Jesus Christ, or his idea of Jesus, and that he remained celibate. And I couldn't care less about somebody, especially if they're dead. I couldn't care less about their sexual preferences or life or how they proceeded in that regard. I have my own way that I live. They can live theirs. I don't care. But anyway, all right, folks, there's another one for us. Philosophically, Joe Rogan is just gives great interviews, and that's why the folks like coming on his show. Folks like Brian Keating, if he's going to go, I mean, a guy like Brian Keating is probably not going to go on a show hosted by Kim Kardashian, but I could be wrong on that. I mean, she's a very pretty girl, but I don't know what kind of interview she would give in this realm. So, all right, guys, have a great day. See you in another video, and keep thinking philosophically.